Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the most painful lessons teach us the most about our own strength. I was standing in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, still wearing the navy dress I would bought 3 weeks earlier. It had taken me 4 shopping trips to find something appropriate. Not too formal, not too casual. Something that said proud grandmother without screaming for attention. The fabric was soft crepe with tiny pearl buttons. The kind of dress that makes you feel dignified even when your world is crumbling. But there would be no graduation ceremony for me to attend. No proud moment, watching my granddaughter Emma receive her master's degree. Because my own daughter had made it crystal clear, I wasn't welcome. The phone call had been brief, clinical. "Mom, we have decided it is better if you don't come to Emma's graduation. It is going to be small, and we want to keep it immediate family only." Immediate family, as if 28 years of raising her alone, of every scraped knee kissed and every nightmare chased away, had somehow made me peripheral to the story. I would hung up the phone and just stood there, listening to the grandfather clock tick in the hallway. The same clock my mother had left me. The one that had counted the hours through every crisis and celebration in this house. Now it seemed to mock the silence, each second hammering home how thoroughly I would been dismissed. The corsage I would ordered still sat in the refrigerator, wilting in its plastic container. White orchids with baby's breath. The same flowers I would worn to my own college graduation. 45 years ago when I was Emma's age. When I thought the whole world was waiting for me with open arms. Back then, my mother had been so proud she would cry through the entire ceremony, clutching my father's hand as they watched their first-generation college graduate walk across that stage. I would wanted to do the same for Emma. I would imagine myself in the audience, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue, watching my brilliant granddaughter accept her diploma in environmental science. I would even practice what I would say afterward. Something about how proud I was, how her dedication reminded me of her mother at that age, how the future was bright with possibilities. Instead, I spent that morning reorganizing my medicine cabinet, counting blood pressure pills and arranging my weekly pill sorter with the kind of meticulous attention you give to meaningless tasks when the meaningful ones have been stripped away. At 72, these small routines had become my anchors, proof that I still mattered, at least to myself. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Arthritis had settled into my knuckles like an unwelcome houseguest, making simple tasks more challenging. The pill bottles slipped sometimes, which is probably why Claire, my daughter, had started questioning whether I should be living alone in this house. "It is too big for you now, Mom. Maybe it is time to consider something smaller." With help. Help. The word hung in the air like a judgment. As if 40 years of teaching high school English, of running this household, of raising her in this very house, had somehow become evidence of my inadequacy, rather than my capability. But that morning, as I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I saw a woman who was tired, but not defeated. My silver hair was still thick, pulled back in the same neat chignon I would worn for decades. My brown eyes, behind new bifocals, still held intelligence and warmth. I wasn't the fragile creature my daughter seemed determined to see. The phone rang around noon, unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Probably another robocall about extended car warranties or political donations. But something made me answer. "Mrs. Sullivan." "This is Marcus, Emma's friend." Emma's friend. I knew who Marcus was, of course. The young man she would been quietly dating for 2 years. The one she brought to family dinners, but never officially introduced as her boyfriend. Claire had mentioned him in passing, usually with that tone parents use when they are not quite sure what to make of their children's choices. "Hello, Marcus." I kept my voice neutral, curious. I hope it is okay that I am calling. I got your number from Emma's phone. She left it in my car yesterday, and well," he paused, and I could hear traffic in the background. "I think there is something you should know." My heart began to race, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What is it?" "The graduation ceremony." Emma asked about you. She asked why you weren't coming. And when Claire told her, his voice dropped. Emma didn't know you had been uninvited. She thought you had chosen not to come. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the kitchen counter, my knuckles white against the familiar granite surface that had witnessed countless family meals, homework sessions, and heart-to-heart conversations. What did Claire tell her exactly? Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. She said you felt the ceremony would be too overwhelming, too crowded, that you preferred to celebrate privately later. Emma was hurt, Mrs. Sullivan. She kept saying how much she wanted you there, how important it was to her that you see her graduate. I closed my eyes, feeling something crack open in my chest. Not surprise. I would suspected Claire was managing the narrative to suit her purposes, but hearing it confirmed was like having a suspicion of betrayal transformed into undeniable fact. Marcus, why are you telling me this? Because, he said, and his voice grew stronger. Emma loves you. She talks about you all the time, about the books you recommended, about the garden you are teaching her to tend, about how you are the only person who really listens when she talks about her research. This doesn't feel right. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. I would been washing myself, despite Claire's insistence that I should hire someone for that kind of thing. The house felt enormous around me, filled with the echoes of a life that had apparently become inconvenient to the people I would spent that life serving. Before Marcus called, before this graduation disaster, there had been warning signs. Small things that I would dismiss as stress or changing family dynamics. But now, sitting in the silence, I could see the pattern clearly. It had started about 6 months ago, right after I would had that minor fall in the grocery store parking lot. Nothing serious. I would tripped on an uneven piece of asphalt and skinned my knee like a schoolchild. But the store manager had insisted on calling emergency contacts, and Claire had arrived in a whirlwind of concern and barely concealed frustration. Mom, you cannot keep pretending you are 30. This is exactly why I worry about you living alone in that big house. I would protested that it was just a clumsy moment, that anyone could trip on broken pavement. But something had shifted in Claire's eyes that day. I would seen it before in my teaching career, that look of a person who has made up their mind and is just waiting for evidence to support their predetermined conclusion. The changes were subtle at first. Claire started helping with my finances, ostensibly to make things easier for me. She set up online banking and took over paying most of my bills, explaining that it would be more efficient, and I wouldn't have to worry about remembering due dates. When I protested that I would been managing my own finances for 5 decades without any problems, she would smile that patient smile and said, I know, Mom, but this is just simpler. Trust me. Then came the doctor's appointments. Claire insisted on accompanying me to every visit, sitting in the exam room and asking questions I was perfectly capable of asking myself. She spoke about me in the third person, even when I was sitting right there. She has been having some dizzy spells, she would tell Dr. Williams, though I would mention lightheadedness exactly once after standing up too quickly from gardening. The worst part was how Dr. Williams responded to her presence, turning to Claire instead of me when discussing treatment options or follow-up care. As if at 72, I would somehow lost the capacity to understand my own body or make decisions about my own health. It is natural for children to worry about their aging parents, Dr. Williams had told me during my last solo visit, before Claire started her campaign of accompaniment. But you are in excellent health for your age, Margaret. Keep doing what you are doing. Now those words felt like a lifeline I was grasping in stormy waters. Excellent health for my age, not declining, not confused. Not the burden Claire seemed determined to make me feel like. The house itself became another battleground. Claire started pointing out maintenance issues I would been managing just fine, a loose banister that needed tightening, a faucet that dripped occasionally, a section of fence that was looking weathered. Each observation came with the suggestion that maybe it was time to consider downsizing to something more manageable, more manageable for whom this house held 40 years of memories. It is where I would brought Claire home from the hospital, where she would taken her first steps, where she would practiced piano reluctantly and studied for her sats at the kitchen table. It is where Emma had spent countless weekends and summer vacations, where we would baked cookies and planted flowers and read books together on rainy afternoons. Every room told a story. The living room, where we would opened Christmas presents for decades. The dining room where I would hosted Thanksgiving dinners for neighbors and friends who would become family. The back porch where I still drank my morning coffee and watched the birds at the feeder Emma had given me for my 70th birthday. But Claire saw maintenance expenses and stairs that might become difficult. She saw a woman alone in too much space, instead of a woman who would created a sanctuary filled with love and purpose. The graduation exclusion was just the culmination of months of being gradually written out of my own life's narrative, and the cruelest part was how skillfully Claire had managed it. Always with my best interests supposedly at heart. Always with that tone of loving concern that made resistance feel selfish and ungrateful. That evening, after Marcus's call, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my oldest friend, Dorothy, who lived 3 states away in the retirement community where she would moved after her husband died. We would taught at the same high school for 15 years before her family relocated, and we would maintained our friendship through letters, then emails, then video calls that made the distance feel manageable. Margaret. What a lovely surprise. How are you, dear? Dorothy's voice was exactly what I needed. Warm, familiar, uncomplicated by the careful management of my feelings that had become Claire's specialty. I have been better. I need to talk to someone who remembers when I was competent. There was a pause, then Dorothy's voice sharpened with concern. What has happened? I told her everything. The graduation exclusion, the gradual takeover of my independence, the way I was being repositioned as a burden rather than a beloved family member. Dorothy listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or outrage. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Margaret, what you are describing. I have seen this before. My neighbor here went through something similar with her son. It is not about your capabilities, honey. It is about control. Think about it. Claire gets to be the responsible daughter, the one who is taking care of everything. It makes her feel important, needed, and it gives her incredible power over your life, doesn't it? Where you live, who you see, what activities you participate in." The words settled over me like pieces of a puzzle I would been too close to see clearly. Dorothy was right. Every helpful intervention had given Claire more authority over my daily existence. Every expression of concern had been followed by a suggestion that reduced my autonomy while increasing her influence. But why? I asked. Why would she want to diminish me like this? Dorothy sighed. Sometimes people need to feel essential. And sometimes the easiest way to feel essential is to make someone else feel helpless. It might not even be conscious, Margaret. But the result is the same. After we hung up, I walked through my house with new eyes. Not seeing it as Claire did, too big, too demanding, too much for an aging woman to handle, but as Dorothy might see it. A testament to my independence, my capability, my right to determine my own life. I stopped in Emma's room, the one she stayed in during visits. Her environmental science textbooks were still stacked on the desk from her last visit. Alongside the journal where she would been documenting the growth of the seedlings we would started together. Her grandmother's quilt was folded neatly at the foot of the bed, the one I would made during her senior year of high school, working on it secretly for months. Emma had cried when I gave it to her. "Grandma, this is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever made for me. I will treasure it forever." But according to Claire, I was too overwhelming. Too much for a simple graduation ceremony. According to Claire, my presence would somehow diminish rather than enhance Emma's special day. I picked up the photo on Emma's nightstand, the 2 of us from last summer, both wearing ridiculous sun hats in my garden, laughing at something she would said about the philosophical implications of composting. We looked happy. More than happy, we looked connected, like two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. That is when I decided I might not be able to attend the graduation ceremony. But I wasn't going to disappear quietly from Emma's life, and I wasn't going to continue allowing Claire to narrate my story as one of decline and dependence. The next morning, I called the local community college, where I would occasionally taught continuing education classes for retirees. Is there still an opening in the fall writing workshop program? I asked the coordinator. Margaret, we would love to have you back. Are you interested in teaching or taking classes? Teaching, I said firmly. I think I have some stories that need telling. Then I called my financial advisor, the one I would been working with for 20 years, before Claire's helpful intervention. Robert, I would like to schedule a meeting. I want to review my accounts and make some changes to who has access to what. By the time Claire called that afternoon, I was feeling more like myself than I had in months. Mom, I wanted to check on you. I know yesterday was difficult, missing Emma's ceremony. Actually, I said, sitting up straighter in my chair, I would like to discuss that. Emma didn't know I would been uninvited, did she? There was a pause. Then Claire's voice took on that carefully patient tone I would come to dread. Mom, we talked about this. The ceremony was going to be crowded and overwhelming. I thought it would be better, you thought. I interrupted gently but firmly. But you didn't ask me what I thought, and you certainly didn't tell Emma the truth about why I wasn't there. I was trying to protect everyone from unnecessary stress. Whose stress? Claire, mine. Because I am perfectly capable of deciding whether a graduation ceremony is too stressful for me to handle. Or yours, because managing my feelings and Emma's has become a burden you have taken on without being asked. Another pause. Longer this time, Mom. I don't think you understand how worried I have been about you. The fall in the parking lot, the way you have been. Forgetting things sometimes. What things have I forgotten? Well, you asked me the same question twice during our last phone call. I almost laughed. Claire, I asked you twice because you didn't answer me the first time. You were clearly distracted, probably looking at your phone. That is not memory loss on my part. That is inattention on yours. The conversation continued for another few minutes, but I could hear the shift in Claire's voice. Surprise, maybe even a little uncertainty. This wasn't the passive acceptance she would grown accustomed to from me. That weekend, I drove myself to Emma's apartment. I would called ahead to make sure she would be home, and I would ask her not to mention my visit to Claire, not because I was being secretive, but because I wanted to have an honest conversation without the filter of managed expectations. Emma answered the door looking surprised but delighted. Grandma, what are you doing here? She looked radiant in that way young people do when they are on the verge of new adventures. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing the vintage band t-shirt I would given her for her birthday, the one I would found in a thrift store and thought she would appreciate for its authentic 1970s design. I came to congratulate you properly, I said, handing her a wrapped package. And to explain why I wasn't at your graduation. Her face clouded slightly. Mom said you thought it would be too much, too crowded. I was disappointed, but I understood. I know how overwhelming those events can be. Emma, sweetheart, I never said that. I wasn't invited to your graduation. Your mother decided it would be better if I didn't attend, and she chose not to tell you the real reason why I wasn't there. I watched emotions play across Emma's face, confusion, disbelief, then growing anger. What do you mean you weren't invited? It is your granddaughter's graduation. Of course you should have been there. I sat down on her couch, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years. I think your mother has been worried about me lately. Maybe more worried than necessary. And somewhere along the way, her worry turned into a kind of control that I didn't recognize until it was already firmly established. Emma unwrapped the package with hands that trembled slightly with emotion. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the kind with thick cream-colored pages that feel substantial under your fingertips. On the cover, in gold lettering, were the words Dr. Emma Patterson. Her new title and the last name she would chosen to keep professionally. I had it made before I knew I wouldn't be at the ceremony, I explained. I wanted you to have something to record your thoughts as you start this new chapter. Environmental science needs passionate advocates like you, and I thought you might want to document your journey. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Grandma, this is perfect, but I am so angry about the graduation. Why would Mom do that? Why would she lie to both of us? It was a good question, and one I would been pondering for days. I think your mother loves us both very much. But somewhere along the way, she decided that love meant protecting us from things we are perfectly capable of handling ourselves. The problem is, when someone starts making decisions for you without your input, it stops being protection and starts being control. We talked for 2 hours. Emma told me about her new job with an environmental consulting firm, about her hopes to eventually pursue a PhD, about the research project she was planning that would take her to Costa Rica for 6 months. I told her about the writing class I was going to teach, about the short stories I would been working on, about my plans to travel to Scotland next spring, a trip I would been planning before Claire's campaign of helpful concern had made me doubt my own capabilities. I want to be part of your life, Emma. Really part of it, not managed from a distance because someone has decided I am too fragile to handle the full truth of who you are and what you are doing. Emma nodded emphatically. I want that too, Grandma. I have missed talking to you, really talking to you. Lately, every conversation feels like it goes through Mom first, like she is translating between us for reasons I don't understand. When I left that afternoon, Emma hugged me tightly. I am going to talk to Mom, she said. This isn't okay. You are not a burden or a problem to be managed. You are my grandmother, and you belong at my important moments. The confrontation came 3 days later. Claire arrived at my house unannounced, which had become her habit lately. Another small way of asserting that my privacy and schedule were less important than her convenience. She let herself in with the spare key I would given her years ago for emergencies, calling out as she entered. Mom, we need to talk. I was in the kitchen, making tea and reading the newspaper. 2 activities that apparently qualified as evidence of normalcy when I did them, but somehow became concerning when Claire observed them. Good morning, Claire. Would you like some tea? She sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where we would eaten countless meals together, where I would helped her with homework, where we would planned her wedding 28 years ago. Her face was set in lines I didn't recognize, hard, determined, slightly wounded. Emma called me. She is very upset about some conversation you had with her. I poured tea carefully, my hands steady despite the tension crackling in the room. I imagine she is upset. She had been hurt thinking I would chosen not to attend her graduation, learning that the choice was made for me by someone else, without my knowledge or consent. That would be upsetting to anyone who cares about honesty in relationships. Claire's jaw tightened. I was trying to make things easier for everyone. You have been so fragile lately. I didn't want you to feel pressured into something that might be too much for you, fragile. I set down the teapot and looked at my daughter directly. Claire, what exactly about me strikes you as fragile? Well, the fall in the parking lot, a minor trip that resulted in a scraped knee. I have had worse injuries gardening. Your memory issues? What memory issues? Give me a specific example. She floundered for a moment, then rallied. You have seemed confused about financial things, and you have been asking the same questions. I have seemed confused because you started handling my finances without explaining what you were doing or why. And I have been asking the same questions because you have been giving me incomplete answers. That is not confusion on my part, Claire. That is frustration. The conversation that followed was unlike any we would had in my adult memory. Claire was forced to confront the fact that her evidence of my decline was largely constructed from her own interpretation of normal behavior filtered through her predetermined conclusion that I needed management. But what emerged was something deeper, and more troubling. Claire had indeed been taking control of various aspects of my life, but she would also been isolating me from family events and social connections in small ways that I would dismiss as individual incidents rather than recognizing as a pattern. Mrs. Chen next door asked me last week why I never come to the book club anymore. I told Claire I said I hadn't been invited recently. She looked confused and said they would been sending invitations to my email address for months. When I checked, I found them in a folder I didn't create, marked as family filtered. Claire had the grace to look uncomfortable. I just thought some of those activities might be too much for you now, so you took it upon yourself to filter my mail and make social decisions for me without my knowledge. The most damaging revelation was about my relationship with Emma. Claire had been, quite systematically, limiting my granddaughter's access to me, phone calls that weren't passed along, invitations to dinner that were declined on my behalf, even Emma's request to stay with me during her final semester, a request I never knew she would made. Emma wanted to live here while she finished her thesis, I said. The pieces clicking together, she wanted to be close to the university library, and she thought it would be nice for both of us to have the company. But you told her I wasn't feeling up to house guests. Claire's defenses were crumbling. Mom, you don't understand the pressure I have been under. Dad died so young, and you are all the family I have left besides Emma. The thought of losing you, or of something happening because I wasn't careful enough. And there it was. Not malice, but fear masquerading as love. Claire had watched her father die of a sudden heart attack when she was 35, and she would spent the intervening years waiting for the other shoe to drop. My aging had become, in her mind, a countdown to loss that she could somehow control by controlling me. Claire, I said gently, you cannot prevent loss by diminishing life, and you cannot protect me from my own existence. I am 72 years old. I have buried parents, siblings, friends, and my husband. I know intimately how precious and fragile life is, but that knowledge doesn't make me fragile. It makes me determined to live fully while I can. The tears came then, the honest ones that had been building behind months of careful management and patient concern. Claire cried the way she had as a child, with her whole body, and I held her the way I had then, with my whole heart. I am so scared, Mom. I am so scared of losing you that I have been trying to wrap you in bubble wrap, and I know that is not fair, but I don't know how else to handle the fear. You handle it, I said, stroking her hair, by trusting me to be a partner in my own life, not a patient in your care. You handle it by loving me enough to let me make my own choices, even when they are not the choices you would make. Recovery wasn't immediate. Trust, once broken, needs time and consistent action to rebuild. But Claire began, slowly and sometimes reluctantly, to return control of my life to me. She removed herself from my bank accounts after we set up a clear emergency contact system that preserved my autonomy while addressing her legitimate concerns about my welfare. More importantly, she stopped filtering my relationships. The book club welcomed me back with enthusiasm and gentle teasing about my mysterious absence. Emma started calling me directly again, instead of going through Claire first. I began to feel like a participant in my own family, rather than a bystander whose needs were being managed by others. The real test came 6 months later, when I announced my intention to take the Scotland trip I would been planning. Claire's immediate response was a familiar litany of concerns. The long flights, the unfamiliar places, the potential for something to go wrong so far from home. But instead of simply proceeding with her helpful management, she caught herself. I am sorry, Mom, that is my fear talking, not my logic. Tell me about your plans. How can I support you in making this trip safely and enjoyably? It was a small revolution in our relationship, but it felt enormous to me. For the first time in years, my daughter was treating me like a competent adult whose dreams deserved support, rather than a fragile elderly person whose desires needed careful evaluation. Emma, meanwhile, blossomed in the restored relationship between us. Without Claire's protective filtering, our connection deepened in ways I hadn't expected. She shared her professional challenges and personal uncertainties, asking for advice not because she needed to be rescued, but because she valued my perspective. We started a weekly tradition of cooking together on Sunday afternoons. Emma would bring ingredients for some new recipe she wanted to try, and I would contribute techniques I would learned over 5 decades of feeding a family. The kitchen filled with laughter and experimental flavors, and I remembered why I would loved cooking in the first place. Not just the feeding of bodies, but the nourishing of relationships. One Sunday, as we were making a complicated Indian curry that was filling the house with the scent of cardamom and coriander, Emma said, "I used to be afraid that if I got too close to you, Mom would think I was choosing sides, but I realized that was exactly what was wrong. The idea that loving you meant somehow loving her less. Love isn't a finite resource," I agreed, tasting the sauce and adding a pinch more salt. "It is not like money, where giving some to one person means you have less for another. Love expands when it is shared freely." The Scotland trip was everything I would hoped and more. I stayed in small bed and breakfasts, walked through Edinburgh's ancient streets, visited the Isle of Skye, where my grandmother had been born. I felt connected to history, to beauty, to my own sense of adventure that had been dormant for too long. But the best part was sharing it. I sent daily photos and emails to both Claire and Emma, letting them be part of the journey without needing their permission to take it. Claire's responses evolved from worried reminders about safety to genuine excitement about my discoveries. Emma started researching Scottish environmental policies, inspired by my photos of the Highlands, to consider how landscape preservation could be part of her career path. When I returned, tanned and tired and filled with stories, Claire met me at the airport. "You look wonderful, Mom. Happy. I am glad you went." That evening, as we sat in my kitchen looking through photos, Claire said, "I want to apologize. Not just for the graduation, but for all of it. For treating you like you were disappearing when you were just changing. For trying to control things that weren't mine to control." "We both learned something important," I replied. "You learned that love sometimes means letting go. And I learned that I have to advocate for myself, even with the people who love me most. Maybe especially with them." The transformation in our family dynamic didn't happen overnight. And it wasn't without setbacks. Old patterns die hard, and fear-based love doesn't transform into trust-based love without conscious effort from everyone involved. But gradually, I reclaimed my role as an active participant in my own life. I taught the writing workshop and discovered that I had stories to tell that resonated with other people, navigating the complexities of aging in a culture that often mistakes growing older for growing irrelevant. Emma thrived in her new job and began planning her graduate school applications with the confidence of someone who knew she had unconditional support for her dreams. She spent long weekends at my house, not because Claire thought she needed supervision, but because we enjoyed each other's company. And Claire began to find her own interests and relationships outside of managing my life. She started dating for the first time since her divorce, tentatively exploring the possibility that her identity could expand beyond being a protective daughter and devoted mother. The writing workshop led to something I hadn't expected: a small book of essays about family, aging, and the courage required to insist on your own relevance. When it was published by a local press, both Claire and Emma insisted on hosting a launch party. "This is your moment, Mom," Claire said, as we planned the event. "I want to celebrate you properly this time." The party was everything the graduation ceremony should have been. A room full of people who knew and valued me, gathering to honor something I would accomplished through my own effort and talent. Emma gave a speech about how my determination to keep writing had inspired her own commitment to pursuing her PhD. Claire introduced me to her book club friends, not as her aging mother who needed careful handling, but as an accomplished writer whose work they should read. But the most meaningful moment came quietly. After most of the guests had left, Emma found me in the kitchen, washing wine glasses and savoring the lingering warmth of genuine celebration. "Grandma," she said, "I want to thank you for fighting for yourself, for not just disappearing quietly when it would have been easier. I learned something important watching you reclaim your life." "What is that, sweetheart?" "That love isn't always gentle. Sometimes love means refusing to accept limitations that other people want to place on you, even when they mean well. Sometimes love means insisting on your right to live fully, even when it makes other people uncomfortable. I dried my hands and hugged her. This young woman who was just beginning to understand the complexities of adult relationships. That is the most important lesson anyone can learn, I told her. Not just about family, but about life. Never let anyone convince you that you are too much, too old, too anything to deserve respect and autonomy. As I write this, 2 years after the graduation crisis that nearly cost me my relationship with my family, I am preparing for another trip, this time to Costa Rica, where Emma is conducting her research on sustainable agriculture. She invited me to visit, not because she needs my help or supervision, but because she wants to share her work with someone who understands the importance of following your passion wherever it leads. Claire worried, of course, about the altitude and the unfamiliar food and the distance from advanced medical care. But instead of trying to talk me out of going, she helped me prepare. She researched travel insurance and altitude sickness prevention, and packed a first aid kit worthy of a minor expedition. I am not less worried, she told me as she drove me to the airport, but I am learning to trust that you can handle challenges I cannot protect you from. And I am learning that trying to protect you from everything was really about protecting myself from the fear of losing you. Emma met me at the San Jose airport, tanned and excited and full of stories about her research project. As we drove through the Costa Rican countryside, she pointed out various plants and explained their ecological significance with the enthusiasm of someone who has found their calling. That night, as we sat on the porch of the small guest house where I was staying, listening to unfamiliar birds and watching the sky darken over the mountains, Emma said, "I am so glad you are here, Grandma. Mom wasn't sure you would be up for the travel, but I knew you would be. You have never been afraid of new adventures. Your mother sometimes sees danger where I see opportunity," I replied, "but she is learning to trust my judgment, just like I had to learn to insist on my right to use it." The conversation that followed touched on many things: Emma's research, her relationship with Marcus, who had become a steady and cherished part of her life, her graduate school plans, and her hopes for contributing to environmental policy reform. But underneath all the specific topics was something more fundamental: the easy intimacy of two people who respect each other's autonomy while cherishing their connection. I used to think that getting older meant gradually giving up things you loved, I told her as we watched fireflies begin their evening dance. But I have learned that it sometimes means fighting harder for the things that matter most. Not just fighting against physical limitations, but fighting against other people's assumptions about what those limitations should mean. Emma nodded thoughtfully. I think about that a lot in my work, how we make assumptions about what ecosystems can handle, and then we are surprised when they prove more resilient than we expected. Maybe people are like that too, more adaptable and stronger than other people assume. The parallel was apt, like an ecosystem that thrives when its natural patterns are respected rather than managed. My life had flourished once I reclaimed the right to make my own choices about risk, adventure, and connection. The Costa Rica trip became a turning point in my relationship with Emma, but also in my understanding of my own capabilities. I hiked through cloud forests, learned to identify tropical birds, and spent hours in the field with Emma and her research team, contributing observations that proved valuable to their data collection. My lifetime of careful attention to detail and pattern recognition, honed through decades of teaching, turned out to be exactly the skills needed for environmental fieldwork. You should consider auditing some ecology courses when you get home, Emma suggested as we compiled data one afternoon. You have a real aptitude for this kind of observation and analysis. The idea delighted me. Not because I needed a new career at 74, but because it represented the possibility of continuing to grow and learn instead of simply maintaining what I already knew. When I returned home, I enrolled in 2 courses at the community college: environmental science and nature photography. Claire's response was telling, "Mom, that is wonderful. You are going to love learning about Emma's field. And the photography will give you a great way to document your travels." No concern about whether the coursework would be too demanding, no suggestion that I might be taking on too much. Just genuine enthusiasm for my continued expansion into new areas of interest. It was a small but significant measure of how much our dynamic had evolved. The photography class led to an unexpected opportunity. The local nature preserve needed volunteers to document wildlife and plant species for their educational programs. My instructor recommended me for the position, and I found myself spending mornings in wetlands and forests, camera in hand, learning to see the natural world through the lens of both art and science. The volunteer work connected me with a community of people who shared my newfound passion for environmental awareness. We were a diverse group, retirees like myself, young families teaching their children about conservation, college students gaining field experience, middle-aged professionals exploring career changes. Age was irrelevant. Enthusiasm and commitment were the only qualifications that mattered. One day, as I was photographing a great blue heron that had been patiently hunting in the shallow water, I realized that this moment perfectly captured what I had been fighting for during the graduation crisis. Not the right to be seen as young or unchanged, but the right to continue evolving, contributing, and engaging with the world in meaningful ways. The heron was old by bird standards, its movements deliberate rather than energetic, but its focus was absolute. Its skill refined by years of experience, its presence commanding respect from the other creatures sharing the wetland. It was a powerful metaphor for the kind of aging I wanted to embody, not invisible or irrelevant, but seasoned, purposeful, and fully engaged with life. When I shared this observation with Emma during one of our Sunday cooking sessions, she laughed with recognition. "That is exactly how I see you, Grandma. Not as someone who is slowing down, but as someone who is more focused on what really matters. Your experience gives you a perspective that younger people don't have yet." It was the validation I hadn't realized I needed. Not that I was still young, but that my accumulated wisdom and refined priorities were valuable exactly because of my age. Not in spite of it. The family dynamics continued to evolve as we all practiced new ways of relating to each other. Claire began asking my advice about her own life decisions instead of constantly monitoring mine. When she decided to accept a job offer that would require significant travel, she consulted me about how to maintain family connections across distance and time zones. "I learned from watching your Scotland trip," she told me, "that staying connected doesn't require physical proximity. It requires intentional communication and respect for each other's independence." Emma started including me in professional conversations about her field, recognizing that my teacher's perspective on environmental education could contribute to her research on public policy. When she was invited to present her findings at a conference, she asked if I would attend as her guest. "I want you there," she said simply, "not because you need to be managed or protected, but because your presence at my important moments makes them more meaningful." The conference presentation was everything the graduation ceremony should have been. I sat in the audience, watching my granddaughter share her research with confidence and passion, and felt the deep satisfaction of a family member who had been included rather than excluded, trusted rather than managed, celebrated rather than hidden. During the question and answer period, Emma cited my volunteer work at the Nature Preserve as an example of how environmental education could engage multiple generations in conservation efforts. The recognition was unexpected and deeply moving. Not just that she valued my work, but that she saw it as connected to and supportive of her own. After the presentation, as we celebrated with dinner at a restaurant Emma had chosen specifically because it featured locally sourced ingredients, she raised her glass of wine. "To Grandma," she said, "who taught me that wisdom isn't about having all the answers, but about continuing to ask interesting questions." Claire, who had driven in from 2 hours away to attend the presentation, added, "and who taught me that love sometimes means getting out of the way so the people you care about can shine." It was a simple toast, but it captured the fundamental shift that had occurred in our family. We had moved from a dynamic based on protection and control to one based on respect and celebration. Age was no longer seen as a limitation to be managed, but as a source of perspective to be valued. That night, alone in my hotel room, I reflected on how different this moment felt from the isolation and rejection I would experienced during Emma's graduation. The contrast wasn't just about being included versus excluded. It was about being seen clearly versus being filtered through someone else's fears and assumptions. I had fought for this clarity, this recognition, this autonomy, not through dramatic confrontations or ultimatums, but through the quiet insistence that my life remained my own to live, that my relationships were mine to nurture, that my capabilities were mine to demonstrate rather than others to judge. The fight had been worth it. Not just for me, but for Emma and Claire as well. By refusing to accept the role of declining elderly person in need of management, I had freed them from the burden of being my caretakers and allowed them to return to being my daughter and granddaughter. The relationships were deeper now, more honest, built on current reality rather than fears of future loss. As I write this final section, I am preparing for my next adventure, a writer's retreat in Vermont, where I will be working on a collection of essays about family, aging, and the courage required to insist on your own relevance. Emma will join me for the final weekend, and Claire has promised to read my work with the critical eye of someone who understands both the importance of honest feedback and the value of unconditional support. The invitation to the retreat came through the writing workshop I would been teaching, recommended by a participant who thought my perspective on aging and autonomy deserved a wider audience. When I told Claire about the opportunity, her first response was practical rather than worried. "That sounds wonderful, Mom. Do you need help with transportation arrangements, or do you want to drive yourself?" The question represented everything that had changed in our relationship. She offered help without assuming I needed it, expressed interest without trying to control the decision, and trusted my judgment about my own capabilities while remaining available for support if I requested it. "I think I will drive," I replied. "I want to stop at some bookstores along the way, maybe visit that covered bridge Emma photographed last fall." "Take pictures," Claire said, "and call if you need anything. But don't feel like you have to check in constantly. I trust you to handle whatever comes up." Trust, the word that had been missing from our relationship for too long, was now its foundation. Not blind trust that ignored real limitations, but informed trust that respected my right to assess and manage my own risks. The retreat was everything I hoped it would be and more. I worked on essays, participated in workshops, and connected with other writers who understood the challenges and rewards of finding your voice later in life. Several of us were dealing with similar family dynamics. Adult children who meant well but struggled to balance concern with respect. Relationships that needed renegotiation as roles and capabilities evolved. "The hardest part," said a woman named Helen, who was 78 and working on a memoir about surviving her husband's Alzheimer's disease, "is convincing people that needing some help with some things doesn't mean needing help with all things. My son thinks that because I cannot drive at night anymore, I shouldn't be living alone at all." Her observation sparked a group discussion about the difference between accommodation and capitulation. We talked about how ageism, even well-intentioned ageism from family members, could push older adults toward unnecessary dependence by failing to distinguish between specific limitations and general incapacity. "I think the key," said another participant, a retired engineer named Robert, "is being proactive about addressing our real limitations while firmly defending our continuing capabilities. If we don't advocate for ourselves, other people will make assumptions that may not serve our best interests." The conversation reinforced my conviction that fighting for autonomy wasn't selfish or stubborn. It was essential for maintaining the relationships and sense of self that give life meaning at any age. When Emma arrived for the final weekend of the retreat, she fit seamlessly into the writing community I would become part of. She attended my reading with obvious pride, asked thoughtful questions about other participants' work, and contributed perspectives on environmental writing that enriched the group discussions. Watching her interact with my new friends, I realized that one of the gifts of reclaiming my autonomy had been the expansion of my social world beyond family. By insisting on my right to pursue my own interests and make my own connections, I had become a more interesting person for Emma to know, not just as her grandmother, but as an individual with her own passions and achievements. I love seeing you in your element like this, Emma told me as we walked around the retreat center's gardens on her last afternoon. You are so confident and engaged. It makes me excited about my own future, seeing how much growth and discovery can happen at any stage of life. Her comment captured something important about intergenerational relationships. When older family members remain vibrant and autonomous, they model possibilities rather than limitations for younger generations. My refusal to accept diminished expectations for my own life had given Emma permission to dream bigger about her own future. The essays I worked on during the retreat became the foundation for the book that was eventually published, a collection of pieces about family dynamics, ageism, and the ongoing possibility of personal growth. The title, Still Learning, Essays on Aging and Autonomy, reflected my conviction that life continues to offer opportunities for development and discovery regardless of chronological age. The book launch, held at the same bookstore where Emma and I had spent countless hours during her childhood, was attended by family, friends from the writing workshop, colleagues from my volunteer work, and members of the environmental community who had come to know me through Emma's work. It was a celebration not just of the book, but of a life that refused to be categorized or limited by other people's expectations. Claire gave a speech that night that moved me to tears. My mother taught me many things over the years, she said, but the most important lesson came recently, when she taught me the difference between protecting someone and controlling them. She showed me that real love requires the courage to let people make their own choices, even when those choices make us nervous. Emma followed with her own remarks. My grandmother has always been my role model for curiosity and determination, but watching her fight for her right to continue growing and learning has taught me that the best way to honor the people who came before us is to live boldly and refuse to let anyone, including family who love us, put limits on our dreams. As I listened to their words, I thought about how different this moment was from the graduation I would been excluded from 2 years earlier. The contrast wasn't just about presence versus absence, but about being seen clearly versus being filtered through other people's fears and assumptions. The journey from exclusion to celebration hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. By insisting on my right to make my own choices and maintain my own relationships, I had forced everyone in my family to confront their assumptions about aging, capability, and love itself. The result was relationships that were more honest, more respectful, and ultimately more loving than what we would had before. We all learned that genuine care sometimes requires the courage to step back and trust, that protection can become imprisonment if it is not balanced with respect for autonomy. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Emma lingered to help clean up. "Grandma," she said as we stacked chairs, "I want to thank you again for fighting for yourself when it would have been easier to just accept how Mom was treating you. You saved our relationship by refusing to disappear quietly." "I didn't fight for myself, sweetheart," I replied. "I fought for all of us, for the right to remain ourselves as we age, for honest relationships that aren't filtered through fear, and for families that celebrate each other's growth instead of managing each other's decline." The book's modest success led to speaking invitations at senior centers, community colleges, and family service organizations. I found myself becoming an advocate for what I called dignified aging, the idea that growing older should be about continued development rather than managed decline. The goal, I would tell audiences, isn't to pretend we are not aging or to deny the real changes that come with passing years. The goal is to age actively and autonomously, making our own choices about how to adapt to changes while continuing to pursue what gives our lives meaning. The speaking engagements connected me with countless other older adults who were navigating similar challenges with family members who meant well but struggled to balance concern with respect. The stories I heard reinforced my conviction that ageism within families, even loving families, was a widespread problem that required direct address. Many people thanked me for giving them language and strategies for reclaiming their autonomy. Others shared their own success stories of renegotiating family relationships, pursuing new interests, and refusing to accept limitations that weren't actually necessary. My daughter used to call me every day to check on me. One woman told me after a presentation, I appreciated the concern, but it felt like surveillance. After reading your book, I told her I preferred weekly calls, unless there was something specific she needed to discuss. It was hard at first, but now our conversations are much more meaningful because they are not driven by worry. These connections with other people facing similar challenges helped me understand that my experience with Claire and Emma was part of a larger cultural conversation about aging, family dynamics, and the rights of older adults to continue making their own choices. The advocacy work also deepened my relationship with Emma, who began incorporating perspectives on aging and family support into her environmental research. She was particularly interested in how environmental education programs could better engage older adults as contributors rather than simply as recipients of information. There is so much wisdom and experience in older generations, she explained during one of our Sunday cooking sessions. But too often, we approach seniors as people who need things rather than people who have things to offer. Your volunteer work at the Nature Preserve is a perfect example of how environmental programs benefit when they tap into the knowledge and dedication of older participants. Her observation led to collaborative projects between her research team and several senior centers, developing programs that utilized older adults' knowledge of local environmental changes while providing opportunities for continued learning and engagement with conservation efforts. Claire, meanwhile, had begun her own journey of personal growth. Free from the constant worry about managing my life, she had energy and attention to devote to her own interests and relationships. She started dating seriously for the first time since her divorce, eventually entering a relationship with someone who appreciated her caring nature without needing to be taken care of. I realized I was so focused on protecting you from life that I wasn't really living my own, she told me during one of our monthly dinner dates, a tradition we would establish that allowed for regular connection without the pressure of constant oversight. Learning to trust your judgment freed me to focus on my own choices and challenges. I am a better partner and a better mother because I am not trying to control things that aren't mine to control. Her words reflected the profound shift that had occurred in our family dynamic. By insisting on my autonomy, I had inadvertently freed everyone from roles that had become constraining rather than nurturing. The transformation wasn't complete or permanent. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced during times of stress or uncertainty, but we now had frameworks for recognizing and addressing these moments before they became entrenched again. When I had a minor medical scare last spring, some irregular test results that turned out to be easily treatable, Claire's initial response was to immediately start researching medical facilities and making lists of questions for doctors, but she caught herself before taking over completely. I am scared, she told me honestly, and my impulse is to start managing everything because that makes me feel like I am helping. But I know that is not what you need from me. How can I support you without taking over? Her question allowed us to have an honest conversation about what kind of help I actually wanted. I appreciated her offer to attend the follow-up appointment with me for emotional support, but I declined her suggestion to research treatment options on my behalf. The distinction mattered: support versus control, presence versus management. The medical issue resolved quickly and completely, but the way we handled it together demonstrated how much we would all learned about balancing care with respect for autonomy. Emma, who was in Costa Rica for an extended research project when the health concern arose, called regularly but didn't try to return early or coordinate my care from a distance. Instead, she simply expressed her love and confidence in my ability to handle whatever needed to be handled. I love you, Grandma, and I am here if you need me, she said during one of our video calls. But I trust you to take care of yourself and ask for help when you want it. Her response reflected the mature understanding of family relationships that had emerged from our earlier struggles. Love didn't require constant monitoring or management. It required trust, respect, and availability when truly needed. As I reflect on the 5 years that have passed since the graduation exclusion that nearly destroyed my relationship with my family, I am struck by how much we have all grown. The crisis forced us to examine assumptions about aging, love, and family responsibility that we might never have questioned otherwise. I am now 77 years old. I take medication for high blood pressure. I use a magnifying glass for small print, and I occasionally need help reaching things on high shelves. But I also taught a writing workshop last semester, completed a challenging photography course, traveled to 3 national parks, and published essays in 2 literary magazines. My limitations are real but specific. My capabilities remain extensive and continue to evolve. The difference between now and 5 years ago isn't just about what I can or cannot do. It is about who gets to make decisions about how those realities shape my daily life. Emma finished her PhD last year with a dissertation that included a chapter on intergenerational environmental education, drawing on our collaborative work at the Nature Preserve. She is now working for a federal agency, developing policies that incorporate traditional ecological knowledge from older community members into contemporary conservation efforts. "You were my first research collaborator," she told me at her dissertation defense, which both Claire and I attended with enormous pride. "You taught me that wisdom comes from experience, and that the best solutions usually involve listening to people who have been paying attention for a long time." Claire has settled into a relationship with someone who understands and appreciates her caring nature while maintaining clear boundaries about independence and autonomy. Watching her navigate this healthy partnership has been wonderful. She has learned to offer support without overwhelming, to express concern without trying to control. "I am still a worrier," she admits, "but I have learned that worry is my problem to manage, not other people's limitation to accept." The family dynamics that nearly fractured over a graduation exclusion have been rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect and honest communication. We have all learned that love requires courage. The courage to trust, to let go, to make mistakes, and to keep growing regardless of age. My story isn't unique. Across the country, families are grappling with similar challenges as populations age and traditional assumptions about generational roles come under scrutiny. The solutions require ongoing negotiation and adjustment, but the goal remains constant: relationships that honor both care and autonomy, both love and respect. For older adults reading this who recognize elements of their own experience, I hope my story offers encouragement to advocate for your own autonomy while remaining open to appropriate support. The balance isn't always easy to find, but it is essential for maintaining relationships that nurture rather than diminish your sense of self. For adult children who see their own fears and protective instincts reflected in Claire's early behavior, I hope this account offers perspective on the difference between helping and controlling. Your parents' aging doesn't automatically transfer authority over their lives to you. It simply requires honest conversation about how to adapt support to changing needs while preserving dignity and choice. The most important lesson from our family's journey is that relationships can be reconstructed even after significant damage, but only if everyone involved is willing to examine their assumptions and adjust their behavior accordingly. Love alone isn't enough. It must be paired with respect, trust, and the courage to let people live their own lives. As I prepare for my next chapter, a move to a smaller house that better suits my current needs, chosen entirely on my own timeline, and according to my own priorities, I am grateful for the struggles that taught us all how to love each other better. The new house has a perfect spot for a writing desk, overlooking the garden where I plan to continue both my creative work and my environmental volunteering. Emma has already asked if she can help with the garden design, incorporating plants that will attract the birds I love to photograph. Claire has offered to assist with the practical aspects of moving, while respecting my decisions about what to keep, what to donate, and how to arrange my new space. It is a small example of how we have learned to blend care with autonomy, support with respect. No one is trying to protect me from the challenges of moving at 77. But everyone is available to help in ways that honor my agency while acknowledging practical limitations. This balance, care without control, love without limitation, is what I fought for during those difficult months when I felt myself disappearing from my own life. It required courage. I didn't know I possessed, and conversations I never thought I would need to have. But the result has been relationships that are deeper, more honest, and ultimately more loving than what we had before. We all learned that genuine care sometimes requires the hardest thing of all, trusting the people we love to live their own lives, make their own choices, and find their own way forward. The graduation I was excluded from 5 years ago has been replaced by countless celebrations since: book launches, research presentations, holiday gatherings, and quiet Sunday afternoons that honor both connection and independence. Each one is a reminder that families, like individuals, can grow and change at any age. The necklace Emma never received on her graduation day hangs in my jewelry box now, not as a symbol of rejection, but as a reminder that love persists through misunderstanding, that relationships can heal, and that it is never too late to insist on being seen clearly by the people who matter most. When I look at it, I don't think about the pain of that exclusion. I think about the courage it took to fight for something better, and the joy of discovering that the fight was worth it. Not just for me, but for all of us. Love requires many things: patience, forgiveness, understanding, compromise, but perhaps most importantly, it requires the recognition that truly caring for someone means honoring their right to remain themselves. Regardless of age, regardless of changing circumstances, regardless of our own fears about what the future might hold. That recognition saved my family, and it continues to guide us as we navigate the ongoing adventure of aging together, with grace, honesty, and respect for each other's journeys. What is your experience with family dynamics and aging? Have you faced similar challenges in maintaining your independence while accepting appropriate support? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else navigate these delicate relationships. If this resonated with you, check out our other stories about family resilience, second chances, and the courage to advocate for yourself at any age. Sometimes the most important battles we fight are the quiet ones. In our own kitchens, for the right to remain ourselves.